When you look at the kinetic activity in the operations that are happening, whether it is in Israel right now, whether it is attacks against U.S. and partnered forces in Iraq and Syria, whether it is the Houthis just launching everything that they can into the Red Sea to disrupt freedom of navigation, we have a broad range of problem sets, and that is certainly a challenge for the command, but the opportunity space that it opens up for someone like me and for someone certainly like a leader like General Kurilla is that is the perfect space for tech experimentation. You want to be able to test tech in realistic environments with realistic users, and combatant commands are the place to go for that.
This is All Quiet on the Second Front, a podcast where boring conversations around defense tech and national security come to die. Join me, Tyler Sweatt, and my Second Front comrades as we dismantle the mundane, cut through the bureaucratic BS to demystify the world of defense tech. But be warned, this is not a typical government podcast. Ready to get weird? Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm your host, Tyler Sweatt. Welcome to another episode of All Quiet on the Second Front, the podcast where boring defense talk goes to die. We're bringing the big guns today. Really excited to have Central Command's Chief Technology Officer, Sky Moore, with us today. So thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I think I've been a fan since you were Rep Molden's office back in the day.
Oh, man.
So I remember being on like a staff call and being like, who is that person? They're really smart.
Just trying to write tech legislation.
Yeah. So longtime fan. Really excited to have you here. I've had the benefit of kind of following your career and being at least ancillary connected. For folks that might be less familiar, a little bit of just who you are, kind of your background, and what you're up to now.
Absolutely. So I'm currently Chief Technology Officer for CENTCOM, but I think probably the easiest way to describe my career pathway has just been circling the problem of tech in national security, just from different vantage points. So started my career in tech sector, did aerospace and defense consulting for a while. It was at a time where a lot of the primes were looking to dip into emerging tech, so a lot of autonomy and AI shops that were being stood up that we supported. Then moved into the department, OSD-R&E for Defense Innovation Board, more of a policy spin, but I own the S&T portfolio, so got to get a little bit more into the technical weeds. Then moved to the Hill, spent a year writing tech legislation, and then through the Navy Reserves, I actually got mobilized forward to NAVCENT, got to sit with Task Force 5-9, which is focused on unmanned and AI systems, get that operational perspective. Yeah. So just been trying to collect perspectives to make me more effective by understanding the bigger picture of how tech and national security fit together.
It's pretty awesome journey. You know, you talk about Task Force kind of 5-9, thinking about CENTCOM kind of as this like innovation center, you know, transforming, I think, what a COCOM is and what it can be and what its relationship maybe with commercial or emerging technologies. Can you talk about sort of that journey from like the establishment of the task force into how you guys are looking at, you know, building and bridging capability gaps?
Absolutely. So the task force was stood up about 3 years ago, and it's really exciting now to be outside the task force and see the progress that they've made after I left, because in my view, that's a huge indicator of whether or not it's successful. It's not that it hinges on one person.
Yeah. It's not like a cult of personality type thing, right?
100%, which is always the risk when you're talking about innovation, anything, but it really has sustained and continued to deliver operational value for the command, regardless of who is rolled through. But I think so that was sort of an initial salvo, but then in April, about 2 years ago, General Kurilla came into the seat as commander of CENTCOM, and he is an avid proponent of technology and innovation, has a clear history of integrating it into every organization that he's been at, previous 18th Airborne Corps or otherwise. And so he was particularly focused on innovation and technology. We were briefing him as soon as he came into the seat, and then shortly after that, he opened up the CTO role and pulled me up into that one. But I think that there are a couple of different factors around CENTCOM that both push and pull us towards innovation, so to speak. The most obvious push is that the environment just requires it. Yeah. It is extraordinarily active. It is extraordinarily complex. Not to say that all theaters are not extraordinarily complex, but when you look at the kinetic activity in the operations that are happening, whether it is in Israel right now, whether it is attacks against U.S. and partnered forces in Iraq and Syria, whether it is the Houthis just launching everything that they can into the Red Sea to disrupt freedom of navigation, we have a broad range of problem sets, and that is certainly a challenge for the command, but the opportunity space that it opens up for someone like me and for someone certainly like a leader like General Kurilla is that is the perfect space for tech experimentation. You want to be able to test tech in realistic environments with realistic users, and combatant commands are the place to go for that. If you want to know what it is like to execute a targeting workflow, if you want to know what it is like to be a planner looking across the whole strategy of the theater and the different players that may exist, you have to go to a combatant command. And then CENTCOM specifically is particularly well suited for this because of the activity that we face. You cannot sharpen a sword in the way that you can sharpen sword at CENTCOM.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, my background started in CENTCOM, right? It was running around on the ground in Afghanistan back when we thought we were going to win there. You think now the way you just described that, though, it sounds not only sort of fluid and kind of, chaotic, but unstructured, where, we had, I think, at least the appearance of clean theaters of operation where you had Iraq going on, you had Afghanistan going on, and then you had, the Yemen, Syria stuff. How are you guys thinking about, or I guess maybe how are you approaching that sort of lack of structure and, the volatility and variability when you're bringing in sort of experiments or thinking about sort of tech integration? Because it sounds, I think, to a layperson, right, that sounds like the opposite almost of like, hey, there's no control here.
Yeah.
What am I experimenting for? Yeah.
100%. I think it's all about approach. So my experience has been interesting because the first year that I came in the seat, it was October of 2022 through to 2023 was quote unquote relative peace time by CENTCOM standards. And it gave me a chance to see what full throttle innovation and tech integration could look like because we got to try everything. That was the right time for us to come in and flip tables. And if people said, this is the way I do things, I can go in and say, we're going to try something else and we're going to do it right now. And it's going to be painful, but we will work with you and help you find a way forward. And then October 7th happened and we moved into a fundamentally different way of the command operating. And to your point, it was higher stakes in many ways. There was much more complexity, a way higher operational tempo. But that, if anything, it meant that innovation and tech integration was even more important because we had even more challenging problems and required the command to go on all throttle up and think about the different ways that we could solve our problems. What it meant for me was that I just had to be much more precise and scalpel-like in the way that I chose projects that we pursued. It couldn't just be innovation, trying to spur it up across the entirety of the organization. We continue to do that, but where we apply effort and time and personnel, it has to be for the mission.
Yeah.
It has to be because there are very specific operations that are happening and the experiments have to result in an outcome that help us execute those missions.
That's awesome. How do you talk about sort of in that relative peace period, being able to sort of flip chair, maybe be a little bit more disruptive down in like inside an organization or like the business of the business. Now where you've got this sort of, multifaceted and very dynamic environment, how are you guys continuing, you and General Carrillo, like approaching that culture of innovation and sort of building in some of those cultural artifacts or rituals that allow folks to continue to sort of, be curious and, push the concepts of like what's possible?
Yeah. I think we took a lot of the concepts that were started in that first year and simply modified them to fit in the confines of what the operational tempo allows now for us. So like a couple of examples that come to mind are training. When we first came in the seat, we were surging, just shoving digital literacy training on the entirety of the command. We put in requirements for if the first step that you took in the door at CENTCOM, you would be required to do data analytics training, cloud training, understanding even tactical data links, because we as a command have to deal with those so much. And so we pushed that really hard early on, and then we just had a lot of time that the command was spending across the board on that baseline foundational training. Once October 7th happened, got into a space where having that volume of training was not feasible relative to the rest of the work that the staff was doing, but we still find targets of opportunity to pull staff out to make sure that they are staying up to date. So, for example, just 2 weeks ago, we had a senior leader offsite where we pulled the entirety of the command leadership offsite. We had a full day of briefings on what it means to run an organization and be prioritizing data, what it means to be a responsible user of data, understanding where it can lead you to success or lead you to failure if you misuse it. Having those types of pause and train moments has always been a priority for the command. I don't think there's any question there.
It's that reminder of like, if it's important, you've got to create time for it.
100%. Yeah. It's something that
no matter how chaotic the day is, if you don't make time for X or Y. It's the same about, you get up and you PT, because if you PT and you make time for it, then everything else is going to fall into place.
That's exactly the example I was thinking of.
Yeah,
Like, just from a
cool.
more generic military standpoint, that is something that inevitably you can think, oh, I'm tired today. I don't have time. I don't want to get up early to do it. But you have to. It's just, if you want to have a certain skill set or baseline, you have to invest the time. And so we feel the same way about digital literacy. But from a culture perspective, I don't think at any point General Kurilla or the command have taken their foot off the gas of emphasizing the importance of what we talk about as innovative thinking. I know that sometimes innovation as a word can feel really fluffy and eye-rolly, but for us, it really just means something very specific, which is every time you walk in the door, you are going to think, is there a better way of doing this? Is this the only way? Have we come to the conclusion that this is how we do this because it is the best way of doing it? Or have we come to the conclusion that we do it this way?
That mindset is antithetical to so many organizations. And then everybody throws it around and says the government is, and I got it, but it's a large bureaucratical problem, is folks aren't comfortable with continuous change and sort of continuous evolution, revolution, and all of that. I mean, it's a pretty impactful sort of cultural norm to build out at the tip of the spear.
There's no question. And I think that sometimes I've learned so much in this role and at this command because I've seen really tangible examples of how you implement that.
Yeah.
So whether it is the way that the commander requires reporting up to him, where there is an innovation section for each of the components. We have an innovation day for updates where he receives that information. And what it does is it creates a demand signal down that then shakes the entire organization to say, quick, we got to look around for something that we're doing that is innovative that we can then report up. And then it allows the space both to highlight people who are already doing good work, but also incentive for people to say, hey, this is a command that really values that, and they want to hear about if I'm doing something in this space. Maybe I can present my good idea and it won't get shot down. It'll get elevated. And so whether it is the reporting structure and the ways that the commander asks questions, the way that he conducts himself personally, I mean, for anybody who has met or engaged with General Kurilla, he is a
pretty impressive human being.
Force of nature. And he walks the walk when it comes to innovation. He will ask the hard questions. He will brainstorm in public and help people understand how you go about creative problem solving, the types of questions you're supposed to ask, the way that you engage so that you're not shutting down somebody's idea, but saying, yes, if, yes, and what would the way to success be?
It's interesting. And in there too, I think one of the important parts that, I think a lot of leaders struggle with, because you want to promote sort of team cohesion and you want to incentivize sort of that teamwork, is you've got to celebrate those individual contributions that are moving the ball forward. Because if you don't ring the bell for that, everything moves into like this lowest common, and you run to like the bottom quintile problem where you're optimizing for broad spread instead of outcomes. So it's just wanted to hit that so everyone listening is remembering, like, yeah, build teams, focus on outcomes, but you're going to have folks that are carrying the ball forward, that are pushing, that are getting outside. You've got to celebrate them as well.
100%. Giving people their flowers and giving them their moment to stand up and say in front of group, I've got a good idea.
Yeah.
It's so important. We're hosting an event next week, Innovation Oasis. It's our Shark Tank-like competition where anybody can submit ideas. We down select to the final 6 or 7, and then they get to present in front of the commander, our Fleet Master Chief, and a whole range of tech CEOs and others that we bring in. And again, the intention is both to acknowledging the fact that good ideas can come from anywhere in the command, giving them a process to submit those ideas, giving them the clear signal that we care about your ideas and we will elevate them and we will have a discussion about how to implement them. That is what we think helps people keep thinking creatively. Because if they don't think that you're ever going to do anything with their good idea,
they're not
they'll
going to
stop you
right?
thinking.
It's the suggestion box problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, going to turn towards sort of some of how you guys are engaging with the services. I'm curious, and you don't have to answer this because this might be an unintentionally spicy question, but as we continue to move through, sort of like increasingly laborious continuing resolutions, how is that impacting? I was trying to explain to a bunch of folks outside the industry, when they see the budget, they see these giant big numbers, and they're like, what are people complaining about? Like, why aren't they innovating faster? I'm like, well, if you give them 4 months to do a year's worth of decision-making, you're kind of getting some suboptimal outcomes maybe, but how is that affecting you guys? Are you experiencing, I guess, like a drag off of that kind of behind the services, or are you guys still able to be nimble?
I mean, of course, we all, make no mistake, we all are impacted by CRs, and in the worst way possible. I mean, your ability to plan strategically to any degree is somewhat limited when the budget that you're supposed
to. Very nice way to say that.
Gets cut off quarter to half of the way through. So, make no mistake. That said, I suppose opportunity space that it creates is that people are really focused on just making the most of whatever budget you receive once you get past a CR. Yeah. And what we can offer as a command is the fact that we now have an abundance of experimentation series where if you need a quick check on a technology to see if it is working, if users like it, if there is something that needs to be iterated, we have on-ramps across the board, whether it is at headquarters with our digital exercise series, Digital Falcon Oasis, whether it is with the components and the task forces that are running your monthly exercises. If you want a space to really quickly test, do market research, CENTCOM is the place for you because we just have infinite numbers of opportunities to try it. And I think that we've started to see the services treat us in that way where they say, you know what, for this particular technology, we're seeing it evolve really quickly, and then we're experiencing all of the budget pressures that everyone experiences. We have to wring out whatever budget we have to maximum that it's worth. Help us pressure test. Help us understand the questions that we need to be asking industry, the preconditions that we need to put in place to make sure that we have the capabilities that we need in the long run.
Yeah, and that's an awesome way to, I think, position and kind of take advantage of a uniquely chaotic sort of operating environment. Where are you seeing, or what's like a cool success story that maybe, the average listener is assuming doesn't happen between services and, COCOMs and stuff like that?
We've got a really awesome one running right now called Desert Guardian. It's an experiment that is specifically focused on countering UAS systems, and it's dealing with a very specific piece of the problem that we think is very, very important. So just maybe to zoom out for a second, just to help people orient around counter UAS and all of the different issues. The first is that in our theater, of course, it is a really significant challenge. We have size-wise Group 2s and Group 3s, so that's a certain size category and speed, that have been launched in Iraq and Syria against our forces in the hundreds over the last of the year, also in the hundreds out of Yemen into the Red Sea, disrupting traffic in every way that you can imagine. And so our ability to detect and defeat those is critically important. But then when you start breaking it into the pieces of the technologies that you need, of course, everybody thinks about the shooter part of how do I shoot it down? But there are so many other layers of technology that need to fall into place before in order for a shooter to be effective. So we believe that there's a huge opportunity to invest more in the sensor space and being able to make sure I'm detecting further out. And not only am I detecting further out, but I can identify whether something is hostile or not. Yep. Because it's crowded airspace no matter where you are. There's trash, there's balloons, there's commercial airplanes, there's everything you can imagine. Yep. So being able to say, no kidding, that is coming at a bearing and a speed that suggests it's attacking me is really, really important. And the secondary piece of that then means it's not just enough to have tons of sensors that you're throwing out to a user. In my role in particular, I go out into theater a lot to get user feedback about what is working and not. And their feedback has frequently been, you cannot just give us new sensors and new screens because it ultimately actually makes our lives harder. Yeah. If I've got X number of minutes of something coming towards me to make a decision on how to shoot it out of the air and if I should shoot it out of the air, and I'm having to run between 12 different screens, you have actually made my job worse and harder. Yep. And so integration onto a single screen of many sensors, but tracks are being displayed in one place to stop all of the challenges of having to run around and allow their human brain to contextualize and make good decisions is really important. So that is at the core of Desert Guardian. So the way that we're going about it is a couple of series of experiments. We'll actually start in 2 weeks at an exercise up in New York at a range. We'll put out sensors, and their primary metric of success is whether they can pass a track to a screen that is not theirs. And that is the fundamental baseline of success. Yeah. And what we'll get out of that is not necessarily that, other combat commands or the services have to use the sensors that CENTCOM uses. We acknowledge the problem sets are very different. But what you can use is the documentation that we're going to get out of that of how you pass data across an open architecture effectively. What does that third-party screen need to share to them in advance? Yep. What do they need to be able to do and send, and how does their data need to be structured to be able to send? That documentation is not unique to CENTCOM. It is not unique even to the problem set of counter-UAS. Integrated missile defense, there's just so many other problem sets. And so Desert Guardian has really been focused on that, and the Army has been a phenomenal partner in siding along with us to say, we're going to have to make decisions in the future about what we invest in for sensors, for the interface, for shooters. Treat us as market research and say, that's a really interesting lesson learned that you just got out of that about how a contract needs to be written to make sure that data is being passed appropriately and at the speed you need. That's an interesting lesson we've learned about the format of the data and the fundamental laydown of the sensors. Those are the kinds of lessons that I think the Army has really leaned forward in acknowledging that we can provide, and they've been wonderful, wonderful partners.
It's interesting, too, to see the focus kind of on prevention of, information overload and allowing for sort of seamless consumption by, the analyst or, the FCO or whoever's sort of on the other end of that screen. I think, one of my most, shocking sort of tech discoveries in national security was, I won't say the service, but a large service and like this big primary weapon system. And we were walking through, how do you deploy the effect? Like, how do you make the thing go boom? And it was like grease pens on this screen. And then a person got up and moved chairs. And then in order to confirm a thing, the person was in a different room. So they'd call on a phone and I was like, wait a second, what? And they're like, yeah, this is how it works. I was like, this is how you guys built it? And they're like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, why don't you fix it?
Yeah.
And then to your point, they're like, we're locked in this really weird contract. Like it's blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And so thinking about stuff like that early, hey, how do I start to build architecture and build sort of first principles and philosophy in that single panes of glass, elegant simplicity where possible from a GUI standpoint, and get something that is sort of really easy to consume.
Yeah.
That often is the part that gets dropped. Like we'll stitch everything together, but it requires like a Nash equilibrium to understand what the hell you're looking at.
I could not agree more. I mean, well, my interpretation of what you just described is that there is a philosophy that has to anchor on what the user experience is at the end.
Yes.
That starts everything. I have an informal metric that I use. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Oh, this is the safest place ever. Yeah, we swear. I think the intro swears all over it. So.
Oh, perfect. But there's a check that I have in my head, which is that's some good shit check. And it's the check that I run past. There's a very salty master sergeant in my office who gives me very candid feedback about any technology that we have in the door. Yeah. And there are most of them, it's an eye roll or just, that's not really my cup of tea. But there are a handful of things that when we do it right, and he can see the impact that it would have on all of the enlisted folks that he's worked with and all of the workflows that he's ever had to work with, his response is, that's some good shit.
That rocks.
And that is the response until you get to that answer. From my perspective, as a technologist, you are not done. Correct. I don't care if you've gotten a data integration. I don't care if you've made some progress on a policy. You are not done until a user turns around to you and says, that made me safer, that made my job easier, that made my job better.
Yep.
Unless the answer is yes to one of those, you are not done. And so keeping that then anchored on user experience is really the important part, because I worry sometimes that we lose track a little bit of like, how does someone out at a forward operating base have to interact with this screen? User experience is not just, is the color that sparks joy for me that day? User experience is that if I have 5 minutes to do something because something is attacking me, is it intuitive and quick for me to click through and be able to get to a response? And sometimes data is an important part. There's no question. AI models and all these fancy things that layer on top of it are important. There's no question. But we have lost the plot. We have lost the tether to reality if all of that is not constantly pursuing an end state of a user picking up their head and being like, oh my God, that helps me do my job.
Yep. Good is great in so many scenarios where there is like that time horizon, there's a complexity horizon, and then there's like some equilibrium where it's like, this is good enough. And in most times, if you can get good enough at the right time, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point on, hey, I can bring reams of data, and if you give me a couple more minutes or a couple more, clicks and screens, I can get into this ensemble, or I can get this. You're like, cool, I got it. We're not optimizing for that. I don't need like 99.999. I need 86.
100%.
Yeah. Without question. All right, 2 last questions. One, just from a sort of looking forward, right? Like, what are you most maybe excited about, or, thinking about kind of getting into? What's big in like the next year for you and the team?
I'm really particularly excited to watch some of like this is going to sound so banal in some ways, but like the processes that we've put in place make me excited because I believe that they are sustainable without a CTO office. And that to me is the metric of success. It cannot be, again, back to the 5-9 point of it, cannot be individual dependent for something to be successful. And I think what we've done is set the stage for exercises like Digital Falcon Oasis to run no matter who is at the command, where there is the muscle memory and the battle rhythms built into the command's documentation of what we do day to day. That will mean it will continue regardless of whether or not I am there. And that is really exciting to watch and to see teams run, join, leave, come back, have constant cycles of personnel, which inevitably is the case across the command. And to do that successfully, that to me is a primary metric of success. The other thing that I'm excited about is to just keep thinking of new and creative ways to open the doors with tech sector and make sure that our problem set is being shared and that the best, most cutting edge capabilities are being brought forward to us. I think we've had conversations offline, and we have it with across industry about this gap that can exist sometimes of understanding of what the operational reality is and then tech as it's being developed. And it is no one's, malicious fault of trying to do that. It's just, even for people who have been in the military before, CENTCOM is a very quickly evolving environment, and the problem sets change rather quickly. And so it is a responsibility of both sides to be proactive in asking the questions from industry of how is your problem evolving? How do you view this? How does this technology not fit what you need? And then on our side, it is our responsibility to say, this is our problem set, reach out, create opportunities for people to come in. Couple of examples of what we've done to date is there's the CENTCOM innovation community. We have a bunch of tech and VC folks come together, go forward into theater, go around for 10 days and meet users and understand the problem set better. We've also got a tech residency where we bring in folks from private sector for somewhere around 30 to 90 days to focus on a particular problem. But the intent across the board is it's like a language immersion program. Come to CENTCOM and learn about what the problems really look like, what the user's experience really is, what the environment really feels like. And it is a responsibility of all parties to try to close the gap in understanding between those two.
That's awesome. All right, last question. You got a magic wand. You could change one thing. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff. We've talked about relationships between combatant commands and PEOs. We've talked about sort of congressional funding. We've talked about culture, process, the operational environment. What's the one thing you'd change and why?
I would want the one metric of success for grading, authorizing officials, acquisition officials, technology teams, engineers to be impact on the user, and that would actually be the driver. And there are sort of ripple effects out from that and that means that you are required to do, side-along experimentation with a user in a realistic environment. But building in that incentive at the front will shake loose the right questions and types of relationships and engagement that will get us to capabilities that deliver true mission impact. Because at the end of the day, as we've said over and over again, the users, they are the one metric. They're the one metric of whether we've been successful. And so if that was built into everything above them of your acquisition program was deemed successful because users graded it an A to an A-, or it was not successful.
Resolution that would be.
But anchoring on a metric that is That's few awesome. Degrees off from what we currently do, I think could make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I think that this secondary impact there too is just bringing those communities closer together where, just because of the tyranny of the day, and I know everybody's busy and nobody's got, the ideal sort of optimal resources, there's been this bifurcation between a lot of the how do we buy and assess versus who uses.
Yeah.
And bringing them together, to your point earlier in the process, be pretty lights out.
But for what it's worth, the opportunity exists now.
Yeah.
We're piloting it right now. We have got a PEO that is working with us on our experiment and treating us essentially as market research. Yeah. For any of the other PEOs out there, that opportunity is there right now. We run exercises for unmanned systems, AI, software suites related to C2. If there is a tech out there, we're probably using it in some capacity. Yep. And if you're looking for a way to inform your long-term sustained acquisition decisions by user feedback and realistic environments, CENTCOM is positioned to give you the information that you need.
Perfect. Last thing is, how do people learn more? Where do they go? Is there a website, LinkedIn? If some listeners hey, I want to learn more about this, or how's a mission user?
A little bit of everything. So we try to be, our public affairs office is fantastic and is always pushing out information about what operations we're running, but also different activities like Innovation Oasis, Digital Falcon Oasis, everything else that the command is running. We have got a really meaty 60 days in front of us where just about every one of the exercises and activities that I just described is about to be executed. But that's certainly one way. We encourage you to go to the CENTCOM website. There are ways for operators to submit their good ideas to us. There are ways for vendors to submit their tech so that we're at least aware of the things that are out there. We encourage you to reach out to our partners. None of this is done alone. We have phenomenal partners across the Army, CDAO, NGA, so many others, and making sure that your connective tissue there includes a question about what do CENTCOM users need in this moment. We encourage people to do any and all of the above.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for making time. Like you said, you've got a pretty hairy next couple months, so could not be more excited to have made the cut for a little bit of your time. So thanks for swinging by, Sky.
Thank you for giving us a chance to share a little bit about what we're doing. Really
yeah. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.